Alright, this might sound batshit crazy, but Earth, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Neptune, Saturn, Uranus, and Venus aren't the only planets in the solar system. There's the secret ninth one that NASA, and possibly others, doesn't want you to know about. There's this old tale in astrophysics, or astronomy or something, that regards a theoretical planet called Counter-Earth, which is a planet on the complete opposite side of the Sun. And it's kinda hard to prove or disprove, considering we can't see it because it's blocked by the Sun, and it would be pretty damn difficult to get all the way around an orbit to get to this planet. So, like last Thursdayism, it stands as a paradox, or something. I honestly have no idea what I'm talking about, given I'm only a high school student. I do, however, know the answer to this Counter-Earth paradox, and I'll probably make an update later if I found out more information. My story starts about a week ago in the basement of a decently sized house, secluded in the middle of an Ohio forest, where I sat in a swivel chair, staring at a computer screen and waiting for it to take me into my 5th period, science class. One of my best friends, Mike, sat across from me at a parallel table, feet up on the table and eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, same as always. His lunch period was during this time, so he wasn't in class. He was browsing the very site on which you read this story right now, every so often turning his phone around to show me a meme he found. I don't like my science teacher much, so I usually looked over and read the memes. When my teacher instructed the class to finish an assignment on paper, I finished quickly and opened my book while waiting for everyone else to finish. I then heard a quiet, "Hey dude," coming from behind the book. So I dropped the book a little to find the face of my friend staring back at me, smirking. "Yes?" I remember asking him. "Hearing you talk about planets and stuff reminded me of a thing my dad is working on at the CIA," he replied, bouncing his eyebrows a little. He did that a lot, mostly when he wanted someone to ask him to elaborate. His dad worked for the CIA, and he was pretty high up, so I didn't see much of the guy. He usually had important government stuff to work on, so he wasn't even in the country very often. Even considering this, he was my dad's best friend growing up, so my family tried to hang out with his family as much as possible, which included a lot of time with Mike. He usually joined the other 4 people in our friend group in gathering at my house and attending school online. But today, it was just him, because the others all had other plans. I sighed before inquiring, "What is your dad working on right now?" Mike's eyes looked as if they contained full stars as he continued. "Well, basically, there's this theory that on the other side of the sun, there's a planet that's almost identical to Earth, but shrouded in darkness." "Isn't that an already established theory?" "Well, yeah, but my dad's team found a bunch of evidence to prove the theory recently. They launched a rocket with a rover on it a couple years back, and a few days ago a signal came back that showed the rover crashing on an unfamiliar planet that no one recognized. Something about the sky being covered in storm clouds makes it so that no light reaches the surface. They don't know what to do with the information. They called the planet Thera. I figured they named the planet this because it keeps with the ancient Greek Rome thing, while rearranging the letters in Earth. I wondered why they didn't just call it Heart or Ther or Wrath or something. I was obviously very intrigued with this information. "You can't be serious," I told him in disbelief. As if he was expecting that answer though, he pulled out his phone and showed me a picture he took of his dad's computer when he snuck into his office one night, complete with the image of a dark, almost familiar forest, colored a deep black and violet with trees the color of bruises. I just sat there, so in shock from this new information that I didn't notice the teacher continuing the class. I looked back down at my computer, unable to focus on class because of the news I just heard and saw. I heard the ding on my phone as he sent the picture to me, and I kept thinking, why would the government keep something this big from the public? Is it dangerous information? If so, what does it entail? I could only think of what ifs and big questions. I didn't even realize when the teacher dismissed our class and let us all leave. Finally, I snapped out of my trance and clicked off the tab, leaving class and going into math. I spent all of the next 3 periods thinking hard about what I had seen. When my last period, Spanish, finally ended, I exited the tab and sat back in my chair, looking over at the door now separating me and my friend. I decided to try and get my mind off of it, finishing my Spanish homework and almost forgetting about the information. I only left the room when I heard a big commotion in the other room and slid the door open to find Mike standing at the back door, backpack already on, slipping on his shoes in a hurry. I could see slight tears in his eyes as he tied his shoelaces. And he answered my question in 4 small yet ominous words. "I'm in big trouble." He then unlocked the deadbolt and threw the door open, running out of sight. I tried to catch up to him, but he was gone before I even got outside. I closed the door as I entered the house again, grabbing my phone and texting Mike to see what was up. All I got as a response was, "Not now." Even as I tried to get more information out of him, he wouldn't respond any further. I remembered the picture and how he had sent it to my phone over text. I tapped on it to look at it more closely, and the sickening image of the dark forest enlarged on the screen in front of me. I had to shut off my phone and gather myself before looking at it again. Later that night, I lay in bed, trying and failing to soothe my brain with memes, when I heard the recognizable ding of a text message being sent to my phone. A banner popped up at the top of my screen that told me Mike had sent me a message privately. Usually, if someone in our group had something to say, they'd say it in the group chat, but not this time. Nevertheless, I was glad to know he was okay, so I tapped on the banner and it sent me to the texting app. What I saw frightened me. All it was a bunch of random letters, numbers and symbols, some capitalized and some not. I tried to decipher this strange code, finding the words game and damage in the mess, but figured those were probably just coincidences or something. I typed back a single question mark, and what happened next will forever burn into my memory. All he responded with was 4 words, each in a separate text. Look at the corner. I assumed that probably meant the corner of the dark forest picture, so I scrolled back up to tap on it again. My heart skipped a beat as I looked in the lower right corner. Standing there, barely visible, was a man, but not an ordinary man. It was pitch black, save for its eyes, which were glaringly white, staring deep into me. I was surprised I hadn't seen it before, but there it was, clear as day, staring right back at me. I haven't heard from Mike since. In the week and a half since I last saw Mike, the other 4 people in our friend group have visited my house to attend school. All 4 of them asked me where Mike was and why he hadn't contacted any of them since last Friday. But I just didn't have the heart to tell them the truth. All I said was, "He's probably sick and doesn't want to be disturbed." Then they dropped it. I'm honestly glad none of them have read it, so they can't read the story I'm writing now. If they did, they'd be in danger, because I think I'm being watched. I don't know what it was, but lately I've been getting strange vibes from the basement, as if there was some invisible person down there watching me and my friends as we take our classes. Even more unsettling, 2 nights ago our house alarm went off because the basement door was wide open. Nothing had been stolen, which eased my fears a little bit, but I was afraid that the opposite happened. Something was placed there. I don't know, but I kept feeling like someone or something, like a camera or some other spying device, was down in the basement, listening in on our conversations. Luckily, if this turned out to be true, I hadn't said a word about Thera, so they would have no reason to suspect I know anything, right? Although, as I write this, I realize one huge plot hole in my story. how the hell would they know Mike said anything in the first place? A chill is going down my spine as these words are typed into my phone. But I think they had a listening device somewhere on Mike the entire time he was at my house. That doesn't matter right now though. I have to get this down before I think any more about being watched. I've been having these recurring nightmares almost every day since the incident. I'm running in that giant frozen maze from The Shining, and I'm being chased by those vicious creatures from Thera. I'm running and running and running, and then I just can't move anymore. I can hear the growling and the roaring of the things behind me, and then I'm falling endlessly down a dark pit, forever. Then I wake up. The only thing I thought about for the past few days is what the hell is going to happen to Mike. I'm also thinking about what's going to happen to me. I'm so afraid something crazy is going to happen. That's why I'm writing this today. Something happened. So, a few days ago, my older sister Linny came back from a cheer competition in California and joined the rest of us in the group to attend online school. She's a senior, while the rest of us are freshmen, so she has a completely different schedule than us. But since she can't visit any of her senior friends, she hangs out with us. So let me introduce you to the rest of the nerds. There's Scott, the TikToker, Devlin, whom we call Dave because of a long-running joke, and V, my girlfriend. Then there's obviously Linny, the popular girl and the oldest in the group. Mike, my best friend, who usually tells me everything. And then me, the guy who isn't necessarily the main character of this story. But if you called me that, I wouldn't object. I've tried to contact Mike so many times in the past week, but he hasn't answered any of my texts since the terrifying look in the corner incident last Friday. I'm worried he might be in danger, and I'm thinking about talking to the rest of the nerds and going down to his house, which is just as secluded as mine, about 15 minutes up the road. That's also why I'm writing this update today. I haven't had any messages from Mike lately, but something weird was sent to my house yesterday. Let me set the scene real quick. I was looking through my story from the other day, reading the comments to try to find some advice on what to do, when I heard the doorbell ring. My dad was at work and my mom was getting groceries, so Linny and I were the only ones in the house. I was in the study hall, which was basically just a free period for online students, so I was up in my bedroom. I heard Linny yell at me from the basement to get the door, and I begrudgingly got up. As I descended the stairs to the foyer, I listened for the sound of a second ring, but didn't get one. As I neared the front door, I could see through the windows on either side that there was no one standing there. Figuring it was just Amazon delivering a package, I unlocked the door and swung it open to find nothing there. I listened through the pouring rain for the sound of a car leaving the house, but didn't get that either. That's when I looked down and saw it. I immediately recognized it as the familiar side of one of Mike's classic codebreaker sheets, the stuff he would always give us when he came up with a puzzle or riddle for us. A small tear fell down my cheek as I saw it, realizing Mike was okay, and knelt down to pick up the paper. I looked at it, seeing a note written in his handwriting in the corner. I looked through the trees for any sign of him, but after finding nothing but a couple of squirrels, I closed the door and locked it. I went back to the basement where Linny was sitting to the seat next to mine, listening to some video about World War II. I plopped down in my seat and Linny looked over at me, clearly seeing my distress and sadness. "What's wrong?" she asked, and I immediately held up the paper for her to see. She took it and, obviously recognizing it, followed her previous question with, "Okay, seriously, what the hell is going on with Mike? Where is he? You obviously know something the rest of us don't." I broke down. I told her everything that had happened, from the story Mike told me to the picture he showed me. I even showed her the picture. She was skeptical at first, but eventually believed me. It felt a mixture of relaxing and terrifying to confide in my sister after a week of silence on my part, both because I could finally get the weight off my shoulders, and because there might have been some sort of camera there hearing me give away top secret government information. My attention was brought back to the paper I had been given after I finished telling my story, and I read the note in the corner. It felt as if my heart stopped as the words echoed in my brain. They tapped my phone. Don't text me anymore. Read The Outsiders for more information. The Outsiders was one of my favorite books a few years back. I hadn't read it in so long that I didn't know what he meant by read it for more information. Then it clicked. Mike was into puzzles and riddles of all sorts, but the type of puzzle he loved the most was what he called a book code. He would take a bunch of seemingly random letters and numbers and give you a book to read, where each of the symbols corresponded to a letter found on different pages. It was very elaborate, and I always thought he was a genius when it came to puzzles. I must have been going at the speed of an X-15 upstairs to my room. I dashed into my closet, shuffling through the bookshelf inside to find the book. I immediately ran all the way back downstairs and opened the Messages app to decode the letters and numbers in the creepy text he had sent me a week ago. And after a half hour of decoding, I finally found the message. Thera is real. And Thry, know you know that. The Nime statue is important. Don't look for me. There were a couple errors in my decoding, but I could tell that Mike really didn't want me to contact him anymore. Then I noticed the mention of the Nime statue, which I figured meant gnome statue. And I looked ahead of me to find a porcelain Ohio State gnome statuette, one that got on my nerves all the time for always staring at me. I immediately stood up and walked over to the figure, looking back at Linny, who was staring at me as I went. I turned back to the figure, grabbing it with both hands and shaking it to see if I could hear anything. I didn't, so I took a deep breath, looked back at Linny again, and dropped the gnome. It crashed to the floor next to my feet, shattering into thousands of tiny shards. I glanced down at the destroyed figure, and what I saw was exactly what I feared. A small spherical camera was embedded into one of the figure's eyes. Linny walked over to the mess and gasped when she saw the camera, covering her mouth with her hands. I noticed she was crying, and admittedly, the only reason I wasn't doing the same was because I wanted to stay strong for her. I knelt down to inspect the camera, throwing it to the ground and stomping on it to destroy it. I got back up and hugged Lily, very afraid of what I just did. I heard my phone ding from the table across the room. I let go of Lily to walk over to it, and found that a number I didn't recognize had sent me a text. I swiped open my phone to read it, and yet again, my heart stopped. Now we know you know about Thera. For future reference, never go snooping where you don't belong. Stop stealing government secrets. Thomas? Lenny said from across the room. I looked up from my phone to see what she was talking about, and all I remember after that was seeing a strange, creepy-looking guy standing at the back door, which is basically just one giant moving window with what looked like a gun pointed straight at me. I then watched as he shot through the window, and then I blacked out as Lily screamed. I woke up on the floor of the basement with a tranquilizer dart in my neck. The back door was wide open, and Lily was nowhere to be found. I messed up, like really bad. No way am I getting out of this one. Before I go any farther, I was previously under the impression that none of the other nerds besides Mike had read it. Well, I was mistaken, and boy did that bite me in the ass. V texted the group chat my stories on Tuesday, right after I posted my first update. This caption followed. Care to explain, Tommy? Yup, I was screwed. I scrambled to find a reasonable explanation for, first of all, the disappearances of Mike and my sister, and secondly, how I knew so much about the incidents. I couldn't come up with anything fast enough, so Scott and Dave ended up joining in the interrogation. 15 minutes of sweat and heart pounding later, they knocked on my front door. I had to tell them everything. If I didn't, I knew they wouldn't forgive me. I was putting them in danger, but there were no cameras around me, right? I told them about Thera. I showed them the picture of the creature, and I explained the sudden disappearance of my sister, which even I was still trying to comprehend. I wanted to know why they didn't take me with her. All she did was learn the truth, and now she was missing. One day later, and my mind was still racing with questions. Why did they leave me? Why did they take her? Who was that guy? Why did they care so much about Thera? What even was Thera? I looked back up at V, Scott, and Dave after thinking these questions. V was standing over me, hands on her hips, with Scott crossing his arms over his chest behind her, and Dave next to him staring at me with a strange look on her face. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. "We leave for Mike's house on Friday night." Friday night arrived. I was looking through Reddit for tips on how to deal with the CIA hunting you down, but got no good results when I heard the doorbell ring. My parents hadn't been home much since Lily disappeared, joining in the search party that had formed earlier today. I had feigned illness so I could go to Mike's place with the other nerds. I leapt out of my bed and ran downstairs to the front door, unlocking it and throwing it open to find the three most trustworthy faces waiting for me. I had to put together a search packet complete with flashlights, snacks, and bottled water. So I reached into the back to hand everyone some chips and flashlights, closing and locking the front door behind me as I ventured out into the darkness of the night. We started walking, listening to the chirp of crickets all around us. Also, almost crossing paths with a bear. It took the group about half an hour to get to his house when it finally showed up through the dark. And when it finally showed up through the dark, we exchanged worried and excited glances, pressing on through the final stretch. We got to the front door, and, out of habit, I knocked. The door was already unlocked and slightly open though, which I thought only happened in the movies. I aimed my flashlight into the dark house I used to call familiar. I guess nothing is familiar in the dark, but this was so much different. It was as if all the memories I thought were good in this house had immediately died, strangled ruthlessly before my eyes. I stepped inside, pointing the beam around, looking for something, anything that would signal the safety of my friend. I found nothing, which both soothed and boosted my fears. "Come on in, guys," I whispered to the others. "It's safe." "Don't move," I heard the strikingly familiar voice of Mike's father beside me, the only difference being the pure raspiness highlighting the familiarity. The man was pointing what felt like a pistol straight at my head, and I immediately dropped the trash bag containing our supplies. I thrust my arms up in the air, now much more afraid. "All right, Mr. McAdams," I stammered, shaking like a leaf. "Everything's all right. We just came here to find Mike." "Don't say his name," Mr. McAdams yelled at me through wet coughs. That was clear proof that I wouldn't find Mike here. I suddenly remembered a self-defense video I watched a long time ago after getting beaten up by some jocks. It went over how to disarm someone with a weapon, and I was instantly flooded with a rush of adrenaline. In one swift move, I had the gun in my hand and Mr. McAdams on the floor in front of me. I didn't even know how I did it. Then, as if some outside force was controlling my speech, I said angrily, "Tell us where Mike is, and why Thera is so important." For the first time, Mr. McAdams looked somewhat scared. I had never seen him scared before, but right now, he looked like a gazelle with a lion in front of it. All right, he said, standing up with his hands held high. "All right." And then began the epic tale of Thera. About 10 years ago, a small company called Frostburn launched a rocket in a project to potentially get farther than the Voyager. Real secluded place, so you probably didn't hear about it. It went far, even built up more speed as it went around the sun. But a few years after the initial launch, they lost contact with it. They were initially confused and sad, but about 5 years ago, the cameras attached to the rocket reactivated, showing the image of a crashed rocket. It had crashed on a seemingly unfamiliar planet, purple forests and black skies surrounding the camera. Then, from out of nowhere, jet black humanoid creatures appeared from the trees, if you could call them that, and made their way to the rocket. They began to rip it apart, piece by piece, until the feed was lost again. Now even more confused, Frostburn quickly sent another rocket to the same place where they had lost contact with the first, a position halfway around the sun, but this time added an array of cameras to the sides and inside. This time, instead of losing contact with the rocket, it just suddenly appeared in the dark forest again. 1 second, it was moving through space. In the next, it was lying in a clearing with the dark creatures all around it. We called them Nightmen, the creatures. And they do not like humans, or at least human technology. They took the rocket apart again, this time more angrily. So Frostburn sent a third and final rocket, one that was already on course to Jupiter, over to Thera, and managed to get this one to Thera and back to Earth, complete with samples of the ground for studying. This was around the time when the CIA got involved. We called the study the Fermi Operation, based on the Fermi Paradox. What they found in the samples they collected was even stranger. What was in the samples? Scott asked behind me. Ground that didn't seem normal, continued Mr. McAdams. Made up of elements that shouldn't make up the ground. Things like gallium, neon, germanium were prevalent throughout the samples, with mysterious other elements of which we didn't know the names making up the rest of it. It was as if elements behaved differently on Thera, but none of us knew why. The life forms on Thera weren't even carbon-based. The Nightmen were made from mostly strange elements we didn't know of yet, but even the ones we did recognize were strange and not usually able to bring about life. This assumed planet was getting weirder and weirder. Something didn't add up about what he was saying. The strange elements, the makeup of these Nightmen, the teleporting rockets. Something about it was a little fishy. Then it clicked. Hold on, I interrupted the man talking in front of us. How did you know the Nightmen weren't carbon-based? It's not possible to get that from a video, especially considering elements apparently work different there. His eyes went wide as he realized his mistake. I knew that face, and I knew it well. They had brought the Nightmen back to Earth. Oh my god, V said, realizing what was going on, covering her mouth and clearly freaking out. I'm sorry, said Mr. McAdams. But they just climbed on top of the rocket. There was nothing any of us could do, and we really needed that sample. None of us cared. We just stood there, almost silent, waiting for him to continue. Look, it's not like they're... He coughed into his elbow a bit. Sorry, but it's not like they're very dangerous against humans. They may be able to take apart a rocket quickly, but they are not very strong. I still wondered how elements could just work differently on Thera. I asked him. Elements are the same throughout the entire universe, I said. So how can they just act differently on another planet? He looked defeated as he gave his answer. Well, you know how I keep saying, assumed planet, and strange new elements. I nodded, making a face that said, yes, that was very obvious. Well, that's because Thera isn't what you think it is. It's not a planet. It's a portal. "What the hell are you talking about?" I yelled at my best friend's father in front of me. He jumped back a little, and I guess I didn't realize how scary I was being at the moment. "Thera doesn't actually exist in this universe," said Mr. McAdams. "That's why elements behave differently there." "So you're saying that there are literally other universes out there?" V said, taking her hands from her mouth long enough to go on a nerdy rant. "I mean, the potential scientific repercussions of this discovery could push the advancement of human technology beyond levels we even thought possible." "This is a V. Shh," said Dave. "Keep talking, Mr. McAdams." "Yeah, keep the guy talking about keeping federal secrets from the public that people should know," I snapped. "I mean, how did you get away with all this?" "I don't know," he replied. "But we did. We took 6 nightmen from Thera, figured out it exists in another universe, and even..." He started coughing into his hand. He turned around, back to us, and I looked around him to find blood start to empty into his hands. Mr. McAdams?" I asked. "Are you okay?" I made sure to step back a little, so as to not disturb him. "Yeah," he said, turning around and smiling. I could see blood staining his teeth, but it wasn't a normal color. It had a hint of violet in it. "It's just that, ever since I was put on the scientific team for studying the Nightmen, I've been feeling under the weather. Like they were carrying some sort of virus." Scott stepped back. "Nope, nuh-uh," he said, covering his nose and mouth with his shirt. "I ain't getting no COVID-20 or something." I just stood there. V could tell I was losing it, because she had put her hand on my shoulder, trying to keep me calm. "You're trying to tell us that you, A, lied to us about Thera, B, kept secrets from the public about it, as well, C, brought back actual interdimensional aliens from Thera, and now you're saying you brought back a space virus that could very well kill us all." "Look, I'm sorry, but tell me what happened to my sister before you cough up your lungs or something." "Well, I don't know what happened to Lenny. I wish I did." "Then, what happened to Mike?" He went silent. "What happened to Mike?" I raised the pistol that used to be in his hands. He sighed. "I was just doing my regular work when I heard a knock at the front door. I went to open it, and when I did, I found one of my friends from work. We talked for a little bit, but then he pulled out a gun and shot me. I woke up a few hours later. My wife and son were missing." "So they tried to kill you?" Dave asked. "Yes," Mr. McAdams responded. "Well, do you know where they be keeping them?" I continued. "I don't know," he answered, putting his hands on his chin, as if he was thinking hard. "Maybe they had..." He started coughing again. This time, it was so bad he coughed up blood on the ground. And it was a lot. It didn't even look like blood anymore. More like grape jelly, or something else purple. Between wheezes, he gasped. They'd put them in." His eyes rolled into the back of his head, and he collapsed backwards to the ground. On his way down, he knocked over a bookshelf, which fell over to reveal a small door. How cliché for a government agent. Scott and V screamed as he fell. Dave gasped. I just stood there, even as they knelt down next to him to see if he was okay. I put my hand to my forehead and turned around, angry. "Is he alright?" I asked. "No pulse," V replied, looking up at me. Now I was fuming. "Great," I yelled. "That's just great. Now we'll never know where Lenny and Mike are. They're gone." "Tommy, you're yelling." "Of course I'm yelling. I'm pissed off." I started toward the front door. I could feel V's hand on my shoulder again. but this time I pushed it away, heading out to the porch. I slammed the door shut behind me. "Shit!" I yelled, throwing a potted plant into the woods beyond the house, hearing it smash against the tree. I started to cry. I would never get my friends back. That's about where it went to hell. I saw the red and blue hitting the forest ahead of me before I even heard the sirens. I knew what it was. They were here. I threw the door open as I ran inside. "They're here! Scott, windows and doors, now! V, Dave, stay here!" It didn't take long for Scott and I to lock all the doors and close all the windows. When we got back to the front door, the girls were shoving Mr. McAdams' body down a set of stairs behind the bookshelf door. Scott and I hurried down the stairs behind them, down into a techie room with a closet and couch, along with a separate room with a computer that showed all the security camera's feeds. V went over to the security camera room, while Dave opened the closet door and dragged Mr. McAdams inside, and Scott knelt by the couch to pray. I just stood there, unsure of what to do. I realized I should probably close the bookshelf door, so I did that, sealing us in the basement. Right after I did so, I could hear footsteps in the house around me. They were searching, for sure, and they were probably going to find us sooner or later. After I moved the door, I descended the stairs again to find that the girls had joined in the praying. I wasn't religious, and they knew that, but I decided to join as well, because if we were going to die, then I might as well. After a few seconds of not knowing what I was doing, I heard a sound coming from the now closed closet door. I opened my eyes to find everyone else looking at the door too, thinking there might be an agent in the closet. I slowly made my way over to the door, placing my hand around the knob and turning. Before I finished turning the knob, V said, "Wait." I turned around and she looked back at me and continued with, "What if it's one of the bad guys?" "V, I'm sure it's nothing." The door burst open, revealing Mr. McAdams, only he wasn't himself anymore. His eyes no longer had pupils, and purple blood was oozing from everywhere. His skin was starting to darken, and he didn't even look human anymore. I quickly grabbed the pistol from the couch, adrenaline filling me, and delivered a loud headshot that deafened me and dropped him to the ground. I must have killed him. But with one victory came another problem. The bookshelf door immediately swung open and agents poured into the room from the stairs. I dropped the gun as they aimed their weapons at us. Everything was happening so quickly that I didn't even notice the thing that used to be Mr. McAdams slowly picking itself up, grabbing onto an agent and pulling him to the ground. The others started to shoot at the creature, so I yelled, "Run!" and grabbed the gun of an agent before escaping the house. The four of us ran for 10 minutes, stopping to catch our breath behind some trees. When we did so, we sat on a few fallen logs, everyone panting and sweating. "What the hell do we do now?" Scott asked. He threw his hands in the air as the sound of screeching flooded the woods. "We should get back to my place," I suggested, as the others soon nodded in agreement. "There will be supplies there, and we can make a run for it later after we're full on food and water. I'm pretty sure I know the code to my dad's safe too, so we can get a couple guns and try to learn how to use them." "Where's the nearest city or town?" V pulled out her phone to answer her question. "I think Cleveland might actually be the closest place," I replied, "and even that's about an hour away. If we walked, it might take until morning." "God," she exclaimed, "we're talking like it's the end of the world or something, like a zombie apocalypse." Well, Mr. McAdams did get right back up after both dying from a space virus and being shot in the head. "Yeah, but at least everyone here is safe," Scott added, looking around at us. I turned over to Dave. I could see she was getting pale. And suddenly her eyes rolled back into her head, and she leapt at Scott, tackling him to the ground as his screams echoed throughout the forest. I could hear the screeching of former agents that had become infected as I took V's hand and ran for my house. "Scott!" V screamed as I led her down the road.
Devlin!
As we made our way toward my house, it suddenly hit me that we were running out of options. I listened to the sounds of Dave's and Scott's now inhuman howls mixing in with the various wildlife in the forest. The very frightening thought entered my mind that their sounds might attract the others, but tried not to think about it as my legs continued to kick at the ground. No one would find us. For the next day or two, we were alone. Completely alone. And that was even more terrifying than anything I had seen in the past 2 weeks. So, this is where it ends. This is the final part. The deciding vote in what happens to the rest of my life. It's been over 2 weeks since Mike initially disappeared. Then, 6 days ago, Linny was taken. I tried to get answers on Friday, but only ended up getting Mike's father and the 2 of my best friends, along with a bunch of police officers and CIA agents, killed. Now I'm here, locked in this room, nowhere to go, with those things clawing at the door every second. Completely and utterly alone. V and I had finally made it back to my house on Friday night at around 10 PM, about an hour after we trekked up to Mike's house to get some answers. Now, we were looting the fridge, pantry, and everywhere else for food and drinks to last us the longest. We had to come up with a plan to go along the river until we found a city or town, because the rushing water would drown out most sounds. We filled bags with the supplies we found, but didn't want to travel that night, so we decided to get some much needed rest and head out in the morning. V called her mom at about 10:30. It was a short but really emotional conversation. But she had to cry silently, so as to not cause suspicion. She told her mom that she would be having an impromptu sleepover at my place, and proceeded to hang up after her saying, "I love you," for probably the last time. She dropped the phone and immediately collapsed into my arms, eventually falling asleep. I luckily didn't have to make that phone call, because my parents had apparently gotten drunk after a useless search party because they didn't want to feel sad anymore. So a family friend drove them to her place for the night. I was glad they would be okay at least. I woke up again at around midnight and woke up V so we could get some rest in a more comfortable place. I said she could go into my parents' room, so I would sleep out in the living room on the couch, leaving a gun on the coffee table for easy access. She told me that she would be too scared and that I had to sleep in the room with her. A little backstory on me. I am the most awkward person on the planet. I have no idea how or why V became my girlfriend, and in the year and a half that we had been together, we had only even kissed once, and that was on accident. Going from that to sleeping in the same bed as her. Hell no. Not that I didn't love her, and vice versa, but I just felt very uncomfortable with even the idea of it. I came up with a compromise where I would sleep in a sleeping bag on the floor next to the bed where she would sleep. I would also keep one of the weapons next to me that I found in my dad's safe, just in case. She agreed, and within the hour, she was snoring on the bed above me. I couldn't sleep, not because of the snoring, but because of me worrying. I kept hearing the screeching of the nightman in the background, and it felt as if it was getting closer. I looked at my watch. 2:17 AM. I sighed quietly, but eventually, the next thing I knew, it was morning. I yawned, stretched, and picked myself from the ground, and looked up to the bed, to find that V was gone. I started freaking out, and I grabbed the gun and began a search through the house. I found her in the kitchen though, making pancakes for us. Pancakes? Really? I asked. Cooking calms me, she responded, especially making pancakes. I could see she had already made a plate for me, so I sat down next to the island in the middle of the kitchen to eat. Thanks, I said, tasting a pancake. It was good. Damn, you're really good at this. She laughed, making a plate for herself. Thank you, Tommy. It's a special way my grandma used to make pancakes. She sat down next to me, grabbing a fork. This was the first time in weeks that I had actually felt good. It was nice. No, it was amazing. But we can't have nice things in the story, can we? A loud crash from the basement echoed throughout the entire house, and I immediately grabbed the gun and hit it toward the basement stairs. I aimed my gun down as I descended, V following close behind, and found an infected agent roaming around. I held out my arm against V so she couldn't come any closer, and pointed the gun straight at the creature's head. I pulled the trigger, and it fell to the ground. I knew that wasn't the end of it though, so I ran over to it and dragged it by its feet out the back door. I tried my best to place it in the river to get it to float away, but it woke up and started to attack me. I pushed it off, managing to send it flying to the other side of the river, and backed away. It didn't attack though. It just stood there, staring at me from the opposite side of the river. I couldn't care. I just ran back to the house. I pushed the table to the door, flipping it sideways to block the hole in it, and took V back upstairs. I locked the door to the basement as we made our way back to our pancakes. That was around 8 in the morning. V and I talked and watched TV and played video games for almost the rest of the day as we pondered what to do. We couldn't go along the river anymore because the creature hadn't moved from the other side. That confused me. Were they afraid of fish or something? I didn't know. At dusk, which was about 9 p.m., V and I were watching some episode of Friends when I heard something peculiar on the road in front of the house. There was only a little bit of light in the sky, so I got up from the couch and looked through the front windows to see an infected agent running full speed at the house. V has gotten up to check what was going on, so I dove for her and tackled her to the ground as the creature crashed through the window right where I had been standing only seconds ago. It felt like an action movie, but I didn't have time to feel cool, because I had to kill it before it screeched and attracted the others. It got up, and so did I. I managed to kick it to the ground, grabbing the gun from the coffee table and striking the creature with the back of it. As it fell, it knocked over a cup of water I had made for myself, dumping the contents onto itself. It screamed in agony as its skin boiled and burned, writhing on the floor. Everything clicked. The river, the water cup, the boiling skin. Water was their weakness, just like the aliens from Signs. The creature wasn't dead yet. I hit it with the gun a couple more times before bolting up and hurtling towards the sink. What a great time to have a sink with a detachable faucet. I took the faucet and spun around just in time to see the creature pick itself back up and leap at V, pinning her to the ground. I could see she was fighting back, so I dealt the finishing blow by flipping the switch on and showering the creature with water. It collapsed to the ground beside V, who quickly stood up and backed away as far as possible from it. I kept spraying the creature with the water until it stopped moving, and kept spraying it more. I finally stopped after about 2 minutes. I dropped the faucet, looking down at the thing that used to be a person. I turned to V, who had a saddened look on her face. "Tommy?" she whimpered, uncovering her hands from her stomach to reveal a deep wound from the creature. The blood was an unnatural purple, and I knew what that meant. My eyes widened as she swayed a little in front of me. Tears welled up. "V, no," I said, stepping closer. "No," she responded, holding out her hand to stop me from moving any closer. "I don't know when I'm gonna snap." V's breathing grew heavy, and she started to sweat, swaying more and eventually kneeling over. Luckily, I caught her before she fell, the pistol in my hand falling to the floor next to us. V looked up at me from my arms. "I'm sorry," she whispered, putting her hand on my cheek and wiping a tear from my face. "V, please," I replied, another tear quickly replacing the one she wiped away. "You're the only one I have left." "Hey," she whispered in response. "You'll be okay. I just know it. V, we can figure something out." I could see her blood slowly turning purple. "Tell me, you have to do something for me." I knew what she was going to say before she even said it. "I can't become one of those things. No, I won't do it. Tommy, it's not your fault. It shouldn't be you. But it is. V, I can't. You have to. It's okay. I know you still love me." Against my better judgment, I put my hand around the back of the gun, wrapping my hand around it and lifting it from the floor. Her hand fell from my cheek and landed on my shoulder. I placed the cold barrel against her head, and she strangely smiled. My heart started to pound in my chest as I imagined what I was about to do. "I love you." I pulled the trigger. V's hand dropped to her side while my tears streamed into her face. I put down the gun and stood up, turning around and bawling my eyes out, trying my best to stay as quiet as possible. I was so angry that I didn't notice V's body slowly peeling itself from the floor, ending in a standing position behind me. I heard her growling before I turned. My head flicked upwards as I realized I had failed the one thing she told me to do. I whipped around, watching as she threw herself at me, tackling me to the ground and trying to scratch and bite me. My whole world was quickly crumbling around me. First Mike, then Linny, then Scott and Dave, and now V. She was the only thing left in my life that actually gave me hope for survival. Now, I wasn't so sure. I threw V to the side, pushing off the ground and sprinting to the gun on the floor. I grasped it in my hands, pointing the barrel straight at her head. Yet, I couldn't do it. She was too special, too important in my life to pull the trigger. I didn't even shoot, as her piercing screams reverberated through the house. She was going to attract the others, and I needed to get out of there fast. I grabbed one of the bags with our supplies, heading toward the front door and swinging it open. What I saw on the road made me almost shit myself. Over 30 infected people sprinting to the house. I closed and locked the door and dodged out of the way as V tried to attack me, face planting into the door. With the basement door still locked and nowhere else to go, I leapt up to the stairs 2 at a time to end up on the second floor. I went through the hallway and into the only room with an open door, the upstairs bathroom. I heard V pounding through the hall behind me. I slammed the door shut as I entered, turning the lock as a loud thump sound came from the other side of the door. I've been in here ever since. There are no windows in here, so I can't tell if it's light or dark out. The only source of time I have is by my phone, and even that's about to die. I don't have many supplies in the bag I have. I have food and drinks that will probably only last me for a week. The gun I brought only has 1 bullet, and I didn't bring any chargers for my phone. After it dies, all my hope dies with it. V's scram did what I thought it would, attract the others. I can hear them clawing at the door every second, slowly getting closer and closer to me. I covered the floor in a thin layer of water, which won't help me in the long run. One will end up dying, and then the others will just climb over its corpse to get to me. The horrible thought entered my mind that, since I hadn't been bitten by the Nightman, I could end it all using the gun and wouldn't become one of them. I'm not suicidal. I just don't want to be a crazy zombie. In the over 24 hours I've been locked in this bathroom, I've had time to think. I reflected on everything that has happened to me in the past couple weeks, and how some of it doesn't match up. How could a company, let alone a small one, launch 3 undetected rockets? How come the Nightmen still live after coming into this universe, since they're supposedly made from undiscovered elements that shouldn't make up life? How would the CIA have so much control over the situation about Thera? I had no idea. I was starting to think those CIA guys weren't really CIA at all. Maybe it was just a cover story. I don't know. Maybe Mike was just a plant this whole time. I didn't know that either. I really hoped Mike and Lily were okay. I hoped they weren't getting tortured by whatever fucked up company was truly responsible for this whole situation. And I hope that, against every statistic that could be made out of this situation, I might have even the smallest chance of making it out of this alive. Yet, with every scratch at the door, that hope dwindled. The Nightmen are going to get through the door any minute now. With my last moments alive, I hope that no one has to go through what I've gone through these past few weeks. I know that no one will come looking for me, and that I'm completely alone, and will be in my last seconds. The only thing that scares me right now is the fact that there might not be anything on the other side, and how I'll just be dead, with no happy ending. I wish you all the best luck. And now you can tell people about the hidden 9th planet they don't want you to know about. Thera, the interdimensional counter-Earth. I may not know what's on the other side, but I do know that, in these moments, I've never felt more content, as if death will precede an eternity of happiness. Good luck to you all. Never forget my story.